there is a conversation going on between Mr. Thompson and Maggie. You may please take page number 84. The conversation is going on that time. Mrs. Thompson, she interfered the conversation. Supper is ready, said Mrs. Thompson, looking into the room a little while afterwards. So now Mrs. Thompson, wife of Thompson, came inside and said that supper is ready. Joe glanced from his wife's face that of Maggie. She understood him and answered, "She can wait until we are done. Then I will bring her some things to eat." So there Mrs. Thompson came and said that supper is ready. Then Joe looked. From that look there was a question. There is a question in that look. What about this poor girl? Then she understood from observing the very look. Mrs. Thompson understood what her husband was trying to say. Then she says that she can wait until we are done. Once we finish, then I will give the food. There was an effort at indifference on the part of Mrs. Thompson, but her husband had seen her through the window and understood that the coldness was assumed. Indifference, that means not caring too much to anyone. So here Mrs. Thompson, she was trying her maximum to act that she was not very much concerned about the girl, and she is showing a kind of indifference in front of her husband that she is not very much concerned about the girl. But you think Mr. Thompson understood the coldness that assumed, that adopted by Mrs. Thompson. Why? Because by looking outside the window, he understood that Mrs. Thompson or his wife behaved properly with this poor girl, and she is having a great concern towards the girl. But in a way, Mrs. Thompson, she doesn't want to reveal that she is showing any kind of concern towards the girl. So she was trying to act in an indifferent manner. So Joe waited until his wife reveals the truth. So he waited. After sitting down to the table for his wife to introduce the subject uppermost in both of their thoughts. But she kept silent on that theme for many minutes, and he maintained a like reserve. So here we can notice that Joe or Mr. Thompson, he waited for his wife to introduce the theme or the topic about the girl and the subject uppermost in both of their thoughts. Uppermost means the top, the first priority. So he waited for his wife to introduce the topic there, but she did not say anything for many minutes, and he maintained a reserve. That means just keeping quiet, and he was not ready to introduce the topic, and he was just waiting for his wife to start the conversation about the girl. At last she said abruptly. Abruptly means in a not prepared manner or a sudden way, she said, "What are you going to do with that child? What about the child? What are you going to do with that child?" Then, as if surprised, he said, "I thought you understood me, that she was to go to the poorhouse," replied Joe, as if surprised at her question. "So I already told you that the girl will be there in poorhouse the next day. I am going to take that girl to the poorhouse the next day." Mrs. Thompson looked rather strangely at her husband for sonic moments and then dropped her eyes. Sonic moments means very fast and quick moments. So she just looked at her husband in a strange manner with a movement of eyes very fast, then dropped her eyes. The subject was not again referred during the meal. At its close, Mrs. Thompson toasted a slice of bread and softened it with milk and butter. Adding to this a cup of tea, she took them into Maggie and held the small waiter on which she had placed them, while the hungry child ate with every sign of pleasure. So after that, there was no conversation about the girl, or there was no discussion about the girl, but Mrs. Thompson, she took some food and she carried that food to Maggie or the poor girl child, and she ate. Maggie ate the food with a sign of pleasure, with the uttermost happiness. She ate the food Is it good? Asked Mrs. Thompson, seeing with what a keen relish the food was taken. Relish means pleasing taste. So by seeing how happily this girl was taking the food and eating the food, then Mrs. Thompson asked Maggie that whether the food is so good. The child paused with a cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude that evoked to new life old human feelings, which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. Slumbering means sleeping, and half score means, one score means 20 years, half score means 10 years. So it evoked, the answer evoked the feelings that were slumbering or sleeping inside Mrs. Thompson's mind for more than 10 years. Why? This woman is a childless woman. So there was no person to love and care for this woman. But now one girl shows the gratitude and love towards this woman. That kind of feeling evoked the slumbering feelings of this old woman. We will keep her a day or two longer. She is so weak and helpless, said Mrs. Joe Thompson in an answer to her husband's remark at breakfast time on the next morning that he must step down and see the guardians of the poor about Maggie. So the next day, the speciality of the next day, Mr. Thompson, he was about to go and see the guardian to get admission for Maggie. And that day, and that same morning, Mrs. Thompson asked her husband that we will keep her a day or two longer. Why? Because she is so weak and so helpless. So we will keep her for 1 or 2 days, few days during the breakfast time. She will give so much burden to you and it will be a heavy burden to you. I shall not mind that for a day or two. Poor thing. Then Mrs. Thompson said that for 2 or 3 days I don't have any problem. If she gives any trouble also I don't have any problem. Joe did not see the guardians of the poor on that day, on the next nor on the day following. In fact, he never saw them at all on Maggie's account. For in less than a week, Mrs. Joe Thompson would as soon leave thought of taking up her own abode in the almshouse as sending Maggie there. Abode in the almshouse. Almshouse means poor house. Abode means dwelling or the staying place. So Joe Thompson, he never went to poor house. For what purpose? To get admission for Maggie. Why? They left the thought of sending Maggie to poor house. Mrs. Thompson, she forgot about the thought of sending Maggie to the poor house. That is why the last line of the paragraph, the author says that Mrs. Joe Thompson, she left the thought of taking up her own abode in the almshouse, the dwelling place in the poor house, as sending Maggie there. Mrs. Thompson, she even forgot about sending Maggie to the poor house. And why it happened, that we will see in the next paragraph. So we had seen that during the breakfast time, Mrs. Thompson said, few days she will be here and after that we will take her to the poor house. In an answer to that, Mr. Thompson said she may give lot of troubles. But Mrs. Thompson agreed that for few days it is okay, I can manage. But here we can notice one thing, that Mr. Thompson, he never went to the poor house. For what purpose? To get admission for Maggie. Why? The couples, even Mr. Thompson and more than Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Joe Thompson, she forgot about thought of sending Maggie to the poor house. You may please take next page, page number 86. What a light and blessing did that sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson, the poor will write. It had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time, just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself, and so became sore, irritable, ill-tempered, and self-afflicting in the dissolution of her woman's nature. It was a great blessing to the life of Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Thompson. A light and blessing did that sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson, the wheelwright. She brought such a kind of happiness and blessing to the wheelwright's house. It had been dark, the speciality of the house of Mr. Thompson. It was very dark and cold and miserable because there was no one to love, no child, no children. So the house remained so dark and cold and miserable, very dull, no activities and no enthusiasm for husband and wife. There for a long time, just because his wife had nothing to love. What was the reason? His house remained dark and cold and miserable because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself. Because they were childless and his wife had nothing to love and to care about. So the house remained very dull, cold and miserable. And so became so irritable, ill-tempered and self-afflicting in the dissolution of woman's nature. So here also you will understand the nature of this woman. She was very sore personality, irritable, ill-tempered and self-afflicting in the dissolution of her woman's nature. Sore means causing pain to others, and irritable, ill-tempered and self-afflicting, causing pain to oneself. In a way, sadist personality in the dissolution of her woman's nature. Dissolution means in the isolated woman's nature. Very nature, the woman or the woman, they have got a desire to become the mother. That is the uttermost desire for every woman, that is to become a mother, to bear children. So that is the desire of a woman. So here she did not accomplish that dream in her life. No children, a childless woman, and that caused all kinds of character change in her. The sore, irritable, ill-tempered and self-afflicting nature. It was caused by what? Because she was a childless woman and there is nothing to love and to care for. But now everything changed. Now the sweetness of that sick child, looking ever to her in love, patience and gratitude, was a honey to her soul. And she carried her in her arms as well as in her arms, a precious burden. Earlier we noticed that Mr. Thompson carried this girl as a precious burden. Now Mrs. Thompson also understands that this girl is a precious burden. Why? That girl brought honey to the sore life of Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Thompson got someone to love and care for. So it brought, that girl, Maggie, brought honey to her soul. That is why the author says, Mrs. Thompson, she not only carried this girl in arms but also in hearts as a precious burden. As for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all that neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. Here, in a way, the author says that Mr. Joe Thompson, he was the most happiest man in that village. No others could drink the wine of life, than he. He was the person who was very much happy in that village. Why? They got a child, and he felt that an angel had come into his house, disguised as a sick, helpless and miserable child. So the title you should remember, an angel in disguise. An angel disguised as a sick or miserable child. An angel took the form of a miserable and a sick child, and that same person brought happiness to the miserable house and filled all its dreary chambers. Dreary means the dull chambers, dull rooms with the sunshine of love. This angel, which is disguised in the form of sick and miserable child, brought happiness to the house of Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Thompson. In their life, a new ray of hope is presented. So I hope that you understood the story. So the main character, Mr. Thompson, Maggie and Mrs. Thompson. Maggie's mother died and she was left alone at home. Then Joe Thompson brought that poor child to his house, and the speciality of Maggie, we know, she was a bedridden girl, and Joe Thompson brought this poor girl to his house, but initially his wife was not happy with that action of her husband, and later once she started to mingle with this poor child, that same child brought happiness in the life of this poor childless woman, that is Mrs. Thompson. So finally she also says to her husband that don't send that child to the poorhouse for a few days and I will take care of that girl. But last we understand that they never visited the poorhouse for the purpose of sending Maggie to the poorhouse, and the same girl brought happiness and a hope in the life of Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Thompson. You may please go through the story and find out the new vocabularies and find out the meanings of new vocabularies. And from the unsolved paragraph, first to unsolved paragraph, you may please solve. Thank you. Have a nice day.